Hello and welcome to today's VMware webcast. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to go over. First, we want to make this session as interactive as possible and encourage you to ask questions at any time using the question and answer box located to the left of the slides window. You can also use the question and answer box to get technical assistance if you should need it. The tabs located in the question and answer box are where you can find additional information about today's presentation. Today's presentation features streaming audio only, so there is no need to dial into a teleconference. You'll need to make sure that your computer speakers are turned up in order to hear the presenter and today's content. You can also fine-tune the audio by using the volume controls inside the media window. This presentation console allows you to interact and customize the layout to fit your viewing needs. You can collapse and expand any window on the console just like you would on your desktop by dragging the corners in or out. In addition, you can also maximize or close any of the windows on your screen by clicking the corresponding icon in the upper right-hand corner of each of the windows. At any time, you can reset the console to the default layout and access additional presentation functionality using the widgets at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to turn things over to today's presenter to get things started.
Hi and welcome. My name is Paul Gifford, and this is a practitioner's guide to migrating workloads to VMware Cloud on AWS. My name is Paul Gifford. I'm part of the Cloud Technical Services group at VMware, and with me I have Adam Osterholt.
Hi, my name is Adam Osterholt. I'm a principal architect with our Cloud Technical Services group in VMware, and today I'll be leading off the session. So we're going to cover today first an overview of why VMware Cloud on AWS. And then we'll walk through the plan, build, and migrate stage for any migration from an on-premises environment to VMware Cloud on AWS. Then we'll get into some of the features or some of the things to think about from an operational management perspective as you start migrating workloads. So VMware Cloud on AWS provides a number of key functions for our customers. We have consistency and familiarity with the tools that you're already using. So tools that do monitoring, management, Power CLI, scripting tools, right? Our whole third-party ecosystem of ISV partners. Those all should just work with this technology because it is based on vCenter and vSphere. We also give you the added benefit of direct access to native AWS services as part of the offering. And so because of that, you can then move your workloads very easily port those to VMware Cloud on AWS, but also take advantage of native AWS services and platform services across their wide breadth of capabilities. So if we look at what VMware Cloud on AWS is, it is vSphere, vSAN, and NSX, along with a dedicated vCenter server deployed on bare metal Amazon infrastructure. And so with this, you get the benefits of the SDDC while utilizing the scalability of the AWS native hardware. We also enable hybrid linked mode. And so hybrid linked mode then allows you to connect your on-premises vCenter to VMware Cloud on AWS, so you get that single management pane across your environment. And because it's a vCenter server and has access to all of the standard vCenter APIs, your cloud management platform, our ISV ecosystem, all of those just view this as another vCenter endpoint. So it's very easy to snap into those tools and access them and utilize them for management. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, Amazon Web Services has a myriad of platform services that you can take advantage of. And so we establish connectivity through a function called an elastic network interface. And this gives you a direct network connection from a VMware VM to any of Amazon's native services. And so this is very beneficial if you look at, for example, you want to move an application up to VMware Cloud on AWS, but you want to export some data for analysis to a service like S3 for object-based storage. That's all doable across this elastic network interface. And another big benefit here is there's no data transfer charges within an AZ when you utilize that elastic network interface. So from the end to end, you get the best of all worlds. You can connect and utilize your on-premises environment together with VMware Cloud on AWS through a single management environment. And you also get the benefit of being able to take advantage of AWS's native services, all within a single environment. This is also a service. So this service is delivered, operated, sold, and supported by VMware. And what that means is that you come to our portal and you click, I want an SDDC. And you just say how many nodes you want, what AWS VPC do you want that connected to, and off it goes. It builds that environment for you. And within 2 hours, that environment is available to deploy workloads onto. But it goes further than that. We handle the lifecycle management of this environment as well. So as a new vSphere release comes out, as a security hotfix comes out, we automatically deploy those into the environment and upgrade the environment for you. So these environments will always be on the latest and greatest software from VMware. And as the final step then, if you do run into an issue in the environment, we have live support available for all of our customers. And so that means you can do it through chat. So we have a chat widget built into the UI. You also can call into support. So there's a myriad of ways to really simplify that support experience and the overall lifecycle management of your infrastructure. So the use cases that we're seeing across our customer base, and this is a very wide customer base, is data center extension. So customers that have a data center, it's functioning well for them, but they need that ability to burst, or they need that ability to run temporary workloads. There's a number of different things that customers are looking at there. Another key use case under data center extension is Horizon desktops and being able to leverage this to rapidly expand desktop capacity in the environment. The second key use case is around disaster recovery. So we have taken VMware Site Recovery Manager, the on-premises product, and we have turned that into a service in VMware Cloud on AWS. So it's as simple as clicking an add-on button inside of the UI that will add the disaster recovery components in VMware Cloud on AWS, and then deploy the replication appliances on premises, and off you go. You can begin replicating VMs extremely fast. Another use case, and we see this as a very, very common use case now amongst our customers, are cloud migrations. And these could be whole data center evacuations. These could be migrations of workloads around a specific application, could be exiting a colo. There's a number of different scenarios here, but this is the easiest platform to take a workload, and that's what we're going to cover largely in the session today, to take workloads and quickly move them to VMware Cloud on AWS. And then around next generation applications, we fully support Tanzu Kubernetes Grid Plus on VMware Cloud on AWS. And we'll be expanding that to more and more services over time. So you can also take those applications and modernize them in place right in the platform. So from a regional availability perspective, we are available in a number of regions around the world. So if you look at North America, for example, US East, Virginia, Ohio, US West and Northern California, Oregon, as well as Canada and GovCloud are all available. When you switch over to EMEA, we have Ireland, London, Frankfurt, Paris, and Stockholm available. And then in Asia Pacific, we have Mumbai, Singapore, Korea, Japan, and Sydney, Australia. And not to be forgotten, we also have Sao Paulo in South America. So we have a very good coverage map across the globe for this service. And we're committed to where AWS goes, where AWS and puts regions in place. We plan to be there as well. So with that, let me turn it back over to Paul Gifford, and he will talk a little bit deeper about the data center evacuation use case.
Thanks very much, Adam. So when we talk about VMware Cloud on AWS and some of its top use cases, the one that kind of rises to the top initially when we first started the service, and one that comes out for a lot of our customer user base, is the data center evacuation. A lot of customers are looking at this for a number of different reasons. Part of the reasons that data center evacuation has become such a popular use case and a very driven one for VMware Cloud on AWS is really comes down from a cloud strategy from executives within the company. They also have events like lease expirations or termination of contracts for colos or certain data center exits that may conveniently coincide with that, and they need to think of another way of doing business with data centers. And a lot of the typical scenarios come into play when they need to evacuate a data center for a number of different reasons, and a lot of customers have varying ability to execute on short timelines. They have a skill set that is not necessarily prone to re-architecting applications, and they need to essentially lift and shift. And sometimes there's a bit of a challenge when it comes to unknown dependencies and workloads when it comes to migrating those workloads out of a data center. If a customer has not really done that in the past or have experience with it, they really don't have that ability to know where to begin and suffer from that paralysis analysis. And that's part of the reason that we came up with this practitioner's guide, is to help customers along and help you get started and understand what you can look at in your environment. One of the advantages for VMware Cloud on AWS also includes the ability to provide infrastructure that's resilient for business critical applications. The intrinsic value of VMware HA automatically provides a lot of visibility and infrastructure availability through the virtualization platform. But that extra level of ability for us to leverage the availability zones and constructs within a region in AWS gives us the ability to provide stretch cluster capabilities. And that is something that's pretty unmatched in the industry today. The ability for us to leverage that in a region and provide the availability on top of a robust architecture like AWS gives us the ability to execute on giving customers their needs for a stretch cluster for business critical applications and provide a zero RPO for high availability. When we look at the cloud migration story for VMware Cloud on AWS, a lot of the workflows and thought process for the solution itself has come down to giving us the ability to provide this as an entry point into a use case. So when customers look at a strategy to migrate to the cloud, what we've done is look at it from a holistic perspective and tried to provide prescriptive guidance, workflow management, and insight into the environment to have all the tool set ready for a customer to start that journey of a hybrid and applications to migrate into VMware Cloud on AWS. A lot of the pain points really come down to a balance between complexity, time, risk, and cost. And a lot of those elements come into the applications, the tool sets, the teams within the business, and I'll get into that a little bit further. A lot of the challenges come down to refactoring or re-architecting applications, as well as there could be a disruption to the two business critical applications during a migration, which could handcuff a team's way of migrating into the cloud or migrating into another data center. And if we look at it from an operational perspective, there are some key measurements that the operations and tooling perspective and governance needs to achieve when we're migrating those. So how do we manage and operate those components while maintaining a strong security posture and validating that these applications when they're migrated, landed in the same manner in which they were started out with. So one of the things that we really try to focus on is a holistic point of view to do that. This is why we came up with VMware Cloud Migration Solution. This is one of the ways that we modeled this solution, is to leverage it as a step-by-step process from the plan to the build to the migrate process, all the way through the step-by-step plan. So if you want to learn a little bit more around the solution itself, you can go to the URL, vmc.vmware.com/solutions, and it'll help you walk through some of the screenshots that I'm about to show you right now. The first step is really around the planning, and this is the most important part, where when you know how to migrate, one of the things that you need to do is understand the migration strategy and encompassing with the architecture that you're landing on. So a lot of customers need to understand the network dependencies of the workloads that you're trying to move, the sizing of the workloads, preparation of those landing spots within VMware Cloud and AWS, and how to prepare and have all the prerequisites lined up. The second step is really the simplest part, quite frankly, and one of the most powerful pieces of this solution is to build the solution itself. Creation of the SDC, plumbing the networks, and deploying of the existing tools and components within the infrastructure itself. The whole value prop of VMware Cloud on AWS is to provide that SDDC in a very quick fashion, and that ability to build those in a quick fashion. And then, of course, this is a small graphic, but a big task. And this is really flipping the switch, migrating the workloads in different ways, using different tools and different strategies. And we'll get into that and figuring out how to do that and helping you go down that road. Some of the challenges really introduce themselves in different ways. There's a lot of different skill sets. There's a lot of different architectures within your application base. There's a lot of operational responsibilities and security and posture models that you need to worry about within your infrastructure. So this is a balancing act that a lot of customers really struggle with when they're jumping into a migration. Do I rebuild the application or do I migrate it? What are those elements that I need to consider, and what are those balances that I need to do to become productive on the other end of this migration and during that migration to mitigate risk? So a lot of customers have a lot of struggle around these pain points, and hopefully we can address a lot of those during this presentation and give you some food for thought. There is no single solution for everything. So what we're trying to do is provide a complementary guide to a thought process and a tooling abstract to balance that out. A lot of customers look at the migration in different manners. It depends on your point of view and your focus of interest and technology expertise. You could specifically focus on a set of applications to move first and target those applications, provided that you understand the networking capabilities and the dependencies on those applications itself. So, for example, if you're looking to migrate a specific database application, what connected components are there around that application, and what are those dependencies? Another look at the infrastructure refresh component of this is there an event where you're triggering a whole subset of hardware that's going off maintenance or support, and can you use this opportunity to migrate to VMware Cloud on AWS via a data center refresh? And then, of course, the final one is essentially the turn off the lights and get out of the data center business aspect, where we're evacuating every single entity within the data center, or trying to do that, and provide a migration strategy for that as well. Also, little well-known components around M&A activities or acquisitions is something that is a big trigger for this, is taking those assets that have come in through mergers and acquisitions and migrating it into an existing data center as well. So I'm just going to hand it over to Adam to review a little interesting tidbit around some of the economies of scale when it comes to migrations.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, what we found working with customers, and this is not that any one approach is wrong or right. It's just something to be aware of, right? Is that when you look at the cost of migration over time, there is to refactor an application, to rewrite that application, to modernize that application to cloud native. There is a cost involved. And that cost is incurred largely during the migration because that's the time when the work has to be done. And so with this, we're able to flatten out that cost migration bubble by migrating easily and seamlessly through HCX and other tools that we're going to talk about in this session from your on-premises environment to VMware Cloud on AWS. And then at that point, you can choose the pieces that return an ROI to the business around refactoring. So it gives you a lot more options, a lot more flexibility to bring those workloads over, and then choose the pieces that actually provide value back to the business while reducing that immediate cost around the migration itself as part of your project. So I think this is very interesting, and it's something to think about. I think a lot of customers don't factor this in well when they're planning a migration. And it's something I highly encourage you to take a look at and really evaluate what is going to return that value. So with that, let me turn it back over to Paul to talk a little bit about the planning phase of the migration.
Thanks, Adam. So I briefly covered this very quickly in anticipation of going a little bit more deeper into this. We provide a lot of guidance and steps in this planning stage, but of course, your mileage will vary depending on the organization structure and the way that you have set up your infrastructure and your teams within your company. So the first step is not a technology solution. It's not anything that you'd probably think of. It's really around relationships. And that's building a team within your organization and understanding the key stakeholders that are involved in this approach. We try to take this as an intro for a lot of customers to kind of step back and let's not worry about the workloads for a second. Let's not worry about the task at hand. Let's take a look at the people involved. And I think this is a very important step that a lot of people overlook. And it's something that's a really core basis of a proper migration, in my opinion. We've seen this with large customers already, and it's proven itself time and time again. So when we take a look at it, there's probably a few folks on this call, on this webcast that belong to this group. It's probably one of our strongest bases for vSphere administrators and architects. I come from this world, I worry about the architecture, I worry about the compute storage, all the infrastructure underneath the covers. And this is usually the team that starts getting tasked with a lot of the migration strategy. You need to start thinking about other elements to your organization. Now, in smaller organizations or more silo collapsed organizations, this could be already facilitated in a neat way. But more times than not, I've run into customers where the networking security team and the security and compliance team are either two separate teams or one conglomerate team. And a lot of the architectural principles within VMware Cloud and AWS are slightly different than on-premises. So you need to consider and understand who is responsible for those sign-offs and a lot of that data compliance. Another element to this is the application owners. I've worked with a few customers where they jokingly said, I don't know who owns that application, but when we move it and it goes down, maybe we'll find out. Or we'll turn it off and see who yells. And some of those approaches are kind of joking, but sometimes they can get very serious. So when talking to application owners, understand the application owners around the lifecycle and development, as well as the entire support of that application, so the lifecycle, and the business that's reliant on that application itself. The business is not clearly represented by a word, but you can focus that in on the center icon. And of course, the last one is also extremely important because support and operations and automation and lifecycle components will be significantly impacted during a migration if you're not careful and you don't consider some of the aspects on that side of the coin. How is support and applications and the lifecycle management of the infrastructure itself, how is that going to be adjusted? Remember, we're moving from a support system where you have application owners and infrastructure owners that discuss on a regular basis around requirements. What happens when VMware runs a lot of the infrastructure management and the vSphere environment? How does that actually boil up into support and operations within the team? Another element to this is data and dependencies. And one of the things that I'd like to do is hand it off over to Adam and have him talk about a lot of the things that you need to think about as far as sizing and application mapping dependencies.
What we're trying to do here is take an analytical approach to determining what VMs are appropriate for migration, what VMs may not be appropriate, and how to actually size out what you're going to require in the cloud to move those VMs. So if we start off, the first thing is we have created a tool. I don't have the URL on here, I probably should, but it's vmcsizer.vmware.com. If you go there, it's open to everybody. It doesn't require any sign up or anything like that. You just go there and enter your details and off you go. But what it does is it takes a number of inputs from you. So the IO profile for the workloads. This can either be on an aggregated basis, so it could be around, you look at your storage array on premises and see how many IOPS that it is consuming. Or you can do it on a per VM basis if you have that data. We find most customers have some kind of an array on the back end, and it makes it much easier to get that data from that perspective. And then we take a look at the VM profile. And you can break this up into numerous workload types. And you can say, okay, I have this group of web servers that need 4 CPUs and 16 gig of RAM and 200 gigabytes of storage. And you can put those in there and group them to create a workload for that. And then you can say, I have a bunch of Microsoft SQL databases, and these have this other VM profile. You can go through and really model out your environment right in the tool. And then you just choose the type of server that you want. So we have 2 instances available today. We have the i3, and these are all AWS instance types, the i3 and the R5. And we'll be adding more instance types in the future as well. You put those into VMC Sizer, and it crunches the numbers for you. It does it across a number of different scenarios. It models out what you'll require from a SDDC perspective, and it gives you the optimal configuration for the SDDC. And so that will be the number of hosts required, how much disk space will actually be consumed. All of these things that you're going to be interested in when you're designing the solution are created in a very easy to consume format. Also, if you have questions about how the calculations happen, all the raw calculation logs are available there as well. So you can click in there and you can see, okay, these workloads were memory bound, and that's what's driving the number of hosts, versus this other group of workloads, those were storage bound, and that drove the number of hosts there. And so it's a very good tool to take your initial data and get an idea for what an environment would need to look like in VMware Cloud on AWS. So the most important thing from my perspective, and this is the hardest thing in my opinion as well, is really figuring out application dependencies. You want to move workloads as much in, group them together by applications that communicate with each other extensively, that have requirements. You want to pull those requirements along with the application as much as possible. Now, there's instances where that won't be possible, and that's understandable. But as much as you can, you want to try to isolate applications into groups or waves or move groups, whatever you want to call them. You want to try to optimize this as you move through it. So one way to do this is with vRealize Network Insight. And this can be either the on-premises version that you may already own, or it could be the cloud-based version, vRealize Network Insight Cloud. They both have this function and both operate, will do these operations for you. So the first step in application discovery is to decide what parameters you want to discover based on, right? Because what you want to do is begin grouping those applications. So you can do it based upon workload names. If you have a naming structure for your workloads that is very workload centric, you could use that. You can use security groups and tags that you may be using in your environment already with NSX or vSphere, et cetera. Or you could use workload tags that you manually create. But I think the most powerful one is really the flow behavior. Because what this does, it takes a look at the network flows across your environment and allows you to group things based upon what's communicating with what, and the heaviest. So it looks at everything that workload is communicating with inside and says, okay, these three things here, those things really should migrate together because they're sending a tremendous amount of data back and forth. So if we then take that application discovery, and that's where we begin building our app dependency mapping. As I just mentioned, you can look at the flows. You can use a number of different tools along these lines to come up with this information. But this is all based on the security planner. That this work also has a side benefit as well. It's not just used for the migration. This will also be used to create your security rules for your distributed firewall so that you can implement a zero trust environment when you move to VMware Cloud on AWS. It also allows you to get a good view of the data movement. So if you're leaving something on premises, say you have a mainframe on premises still that you just can't move to the cloud, you're going to still have to communicate back to that. And so through this, you can see how much data is being transmitted back to that mainframe. And that'll give you an idea for the data egress costs for data traversal across the internet or across your direct connect. So there's a number of different facets to what this can do for you. Okay. And then as we look further, we can also get some interesting insights along the way as well. With the tool, we can also see, all of my internet, everybody from the internet that's accessing this application, where are they coming from? And you can break this down and then decide, and this can help you to select the region where you want to migrate that workload to. Say you've deployed an application and it's very specific to Japan, for example. Through here, you look through this and you can verify the majority of your users are coming from Japan, or maybe they're coming from outside. So it really gives you that power to select which region makes sense for this application. And surprisingly, a lot of customers that I've worked with don't have a good idea of where their customer base is coming from to access that application. And then after we've done that dependency mapping, we've decided on a location, we then go and we create move groups. These can also be called migration waves. I think we'll call them waves later on in the presentation. But these application move groups or waves, these are the things that you would start to then say, this is the group I'm going to move together. And this is the next group I'm going to move together. And begin that process of building the information that'll tie into what Paul will talk about later with our migration tool, HCX. And then you want to check your limitations from a networking perspective as well. So there are some limits, and so let me dive into a few of these real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and build this out. So you want to be careful that you don't overstretch the capabilities of the edge. And so there are some limits around packets per second and traffic rate that can flow through an edge device in a single SDDC. So with Network Insight, we're able to validate before we move that application that it's not going to go past the scale limits of that single SDDC. And if you find it does, it may make sense to break that application up across multiple SDDCs. So this again gives you the ability to achieve the highest level of success when you actually migrate by doing this pre-work. And then finally, you migrate, right? And so when we look at that, we have our vSphere on-premises workloads. We would analyze those with vRealize Network Insight App Discovery. And then we would shift that information that we create, that was created with vRealize Network Insight. We would send that or use that with VMware HCX to perform the actual migration itself. And so these two tools together, and they'll be becoming more and more integrated over time. These tools will be an end-to-end flow for our customers to easily migrate workloads across their environment. And then finally, at the end, right, vRealize Network Insight is still very useful. I think back from when I was running a data center, anytime you sent out that notice that said you were doing something to somebody's workload, whether it could be just rebooting it or whatever, supplying a security patch, no matter what you did, you would always get an email back the next day that says, oh, the application is running half as fast as it was before you did this. And when in truth, it's operating exactly the same. And so you can continue to use vRealize Network Insight after you migrate to verify that things are still flowing, right, based on that historical data and the new data for that application. The data is still flowing and still behaving the same way it did before. So it can give you that ammo that when somebody says the application is behaving differently, you can prove that it really is operating the same. It's just that natural tendency that we have. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to talk a little bit about how these work, what this all means when we create these waves and how we move forward from here.
Thanks, Adam. So when Adam was talking about the categorization or migration waves, one of the things that we need to do is take that data from the application dependency component and keep that aside and also look at it from a different perspective. He already articulated the fact that very many application owners, business unit owners, they're very sensitive, especially when you give them the heads up that they're going to might get something migrated. The other element to it is it can't go down. And very many times when you have a discussion around with the business, everything needs zero downtime at the start. And when you dig a little bit deeper into it, you need to understand that they're very sensitive to that and they don't understand milliseconds versus a couple minutes, depending on what that application is. So when we have conversations with the business and the application owners and anybody that's customer facing as far as downtime, we need to understand what the true value of the downtime is and what the tolerance is for it. And as we go through those conversations, you can start to bucketize those components into different elements. And as those kind of flush themselves out, you should have most likely 3 buckets of prolonged downtime, minimal downtime, and absolutely business critical. This will lose the business if it goes down. And as you drive those conversations, you'll start to understand and see a pattern between some of those workloads. And that's important to do this as you move forward. Other migration applications, other migration considerations that you need to be aware of are a little bit outside the realm of vSphere. And this is something that typical vSphere administrators get caught with, and sometimes it's better to step back, and this is why you involve additional teams within that migration strategy. Physical hardware, we can't go on the assumption that every single thing is virtualized. That's not possible today in a lot of environments, and there are physical requirements for physical hardware still. And we're not here to tell you that it can be migrated into a virtual environment, but we can consider those into the workflow and the categorization and bucketization of the applications themselves. AWS has a very robust bare metal service that could be a solution to this, depending on what the application is and what the latency is required. You can also look at co-locating equipment that is physical can no longer remain in that data center if you're doing a evac and provide close proximity to that data center asset. Another element to this is Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, and TimeSync. Everybody knows that if those are not happy, nothing is happy, and a lot of applications start to fail. So architectural principles around that we have documented on our website at cloud.vmware.com can give you the ability to take a look at different architectural principles and assets that can help you make sure that you have a correct architecture for that service and those ancillary services across a hybrid cloud and during the migration and post-migration as well. Finally, the load balancing and network security components is something that is very critical. Adam will probably touch on this a little bit later, but really when you focus on understanding the load balancing and edge requirements for certain solutions, you need to consider different technologies. Can the application be utilized and front-ended with an AWS service, or can we use the native NSX components within the VMware Cloud SDDC to accomplish these goals as well? There's another element to it where you can use virtual appliances that provide network load balancing and security, depending on what the supportability and use case is for those technologies as well. When it comes to certifications and compliance, this is something that is often a forethought and could be a situation if it's not planned out within the architecture itself. Are these applications that are moving, do they require a certain level of compliance? Or are the applications that they're connected to require compliance or certifications that could or could not be supported within VMware Cloud on AWS? It's very easy to understand what we support in VMware Cloud and AWS by going to our security component page within cloud.vmware.com. You can also go to the CSA STAR self-assessment to understand a lot of the elements in which the way we run our operations, do security and compliance, and handle a lot of data destruction and archival of data as well. So I encourage everybody, if they have concerns around or interest around the security and compliance posture and the way that we do our posturing on security and compliance, to take a look at the Cloud CSA STAR self-assessment. And I can never say that the first time anyway. The icons are kind of washed out on this, but on the left-hand side, there are icons that are very much like the right-hand side. When you take a look at disaster recovery within VMware Cloud and AWS, this is something that you need to consider from an architectural principle, especially if you're doing a data center evacuation. If you're removing a data center out of the puzzle and you need DR, what are you going to do to protect those workloads when they land in VMware Cloud and AWS? How are you going to change the architectural principles around that to make sure that everything is protected and the SLAs are kept at that level as well? So when we take a look at this, always consider and understand that there needs to be a discussion around the requirements for disaster recovery. We're not saying that disaster recovery as a service from VMware Cloud is the holistic answer to all of the disaster recovery needs, and it shouldn't be confused with our stretch cluster and high availability infrastructure. So always have that discussion around those requirements, and usually you get into a solution-based architecture that we can solve with some of our solutions in the service. So when it comes to tooling, this is probably one of my favorite subjects to talk about when it comes to how we choose those opportunities and those migration strategies moving forward. When we look at the requirements that we've already built, we've looked at data dependency, we've looked at downtime tolerance. Now we can start to get a picture of how we approach the migration waves and how we start building those migration waves. Usually prolonged downtime can be used leveraging cold migrations. as you decrease your downtime tolerance, from left to right, you can leverage different technologies to encourage that you spin those up. So as we go through this presentation, you'll start to see that some of those applications can be used in different facilitations of the migration itself. Generally, you also need to consider the size of your workload and the workload wave. So when we do initial workload waves, you generally start off with a handful of migrations just to make sure that you understand the process and essentially teach yourself how to fish as far as the tool set of what you want to leverage. Do you want to do a cold migration? Do you want to do a live migration? Do you need to do a bulk migration because all those applications need to move over together? Or do you have a tremendous amount of data that you need to replicate over as an extended period of time, and you need to essentially use replicated assisted vMotion to synchronize that data over a long period of time and then eventually cut over the deltas when it's time to do a migration. So those are part and parcel to the amount of workloads will help you consider what technology to leverage and when. When you take a look at the workload mobility, I'll blow this slide out and make sure that it all kind of clicks out. The application within the stack is important as well. So when we take a look at different features and functionalities within VMware Cloud and AWS, there are ways to facilitate different types of migration and different requirements that you need to consider. When you're moving from an on-premises data center and you could have virtual distributed switches, the standard switches, or you have an existing implementation of NSX, how are your migrations going to be considered when you move to an NSX environment within VMware Cloud and AWS? Do you have existing storage that could be attached outside of the vSphere infrastructure off the data stores? Has those been considered and deployed and factored into the migration itself? Content library is probably one of the hidden gems that gets overlooked on a repeated basis for using migrations for templates, as well as facilitating ease of use through our automation platforms. So when a customer looks at using an automation platform during the migration, you have the ability to use content library and consume content libraries through on-premises and VMware Cloud and AWS as well. So it's something to consider. The migration timeline and the waves, this is really coming down to all the bucketizing and work that we've done and the investigation of all the analysis of those workloads. Make sure that you, as I mentioned, start slow and gradually build up. We've had customers start off with 10, 12 workloads and over a weekend during one change window. And then we've heard that a month later, they could move up to 600 workloads in a weekend and essentially automate the entire thing by leveraging HCX technology. Those are really powerful examples of the speed in which we can leverage HCX and the automation underneath it to provide a ease of use across the platform. So one of the steps that we need to also consider is the build step. And that's pretty simple as far as the SDDC build. I already covered it initially, but one of the value props around VMware Cloud and AWS is the ability to spin up an SDDC in a matter of minutes, in a matter of hours, sorry, and ability to scale out that infrastructure as well. So when you deploy an SDDC, it walks you through those prescriptive elements and it helps you understand what networks to create based on the architecture that exists within your SDDC on premises and what you need to migrate to. So you can have a mapping within HCX to migrate from and to as far as storage and networking. And finally, that migration is really just focusing on the HCX components as well. So executing the migration, that element is really just leveraging the HCX tool itself. Of course, The icons are not showing up too fancy on this, but we'll get through it together. The elements around HCX really gives that capability of standing up the interconnect and the toughest pieces between the two data centers. The hybrid interconnect that is stood up and the automation around that is giving us a layered connection across an existing data center that could be as old as a vSphere 5X environment, and moving those components into cloud with little or no effort. The ability for us to set up and plumb those networks and have that consistency of those networks from one end to another gives us the capability of migrating those workloads. I did mention that you have the capability of using different technology and profiles within the solution as well. Live migrations and vMotions you use for single workload migrations. And if you wanted to use more of a paralleled and scheduled migration strategy, you could flip the switch on a handful of virtual machines or an application that needs to stay together all the way through the migration and leverage the bulk migration schedule. That gives you the capability of scheduling a task and executing on those migrations at a predetermined time. Usually that's used in conjunction with a change window and usually offload systems that are no longer in production use during business hours. So taking a little bit of downtime as well. For those really massive workloads or really important ones, that's where replicated assisted vMotion comes into play, where you can't have any service interruption. You can't have any type of downtime. And maybe those applications are pretty massive with a lot of data behind them. Giving that capability of using replicated vMotion and snapshot technology, we have the ability to see that information initially, and then when all that data is there, you can do a flip of the switch and a quick migration of the last bits because we've already essentially migrated a lot of those components already over. So I'm going to flip it back over to Mr. Osterholt, and he's going to talk about a little bit more around the operational considerations, and then can move on from there.
All right, thanks, Paul. So a couple of things that we just run across very frequently with our customers and their migration efforts is there's easy things to forget. So the first is around monitoring and management. A lot of times you have to set up an additional vCenter endpoint. You want to do that in advance. Don't wait until you've already moved a workload and then discover, oh, I'm not monitoring that workload, something happens. So make sure you're taking that into account as you're planning out the project. And also, from a networking perspective, after you stretch those networks to migrate workloads, if everything is running in the cloud, go back and remove that stretch. There's no reason for that extra complexity to be there, and it can add some significant troubleshooting complexity if everything is running in one place and you're still having to look at both sides of the network. And also, don't forget about load balancers. If you're still using physical load balancers, reconfigure those to point to a new location, or look at refactoring those into virtual appliances, or using some native feature in AWS or NSX. And then lastly, and this is the most important item, don't just continue using your backup tools as they are today. I've had a number of customers that have moved the first set of workloads and then discovered that they were generating a lot of traffic back to on-premises because they were still backing up to their on-premises infrastructure. So as part of the build of your environment, factor backup in there and make sure that you have that in place before you move the first workload. Similarly, don't forget about disaster recovery. If you need a disaster recovery on premises, you likely need disaster recovery in the cloud as well. So set up cloud-to-cloud disaster recovery with VMware Site Recovery and set those workloads up as you migrate them. And then the last thing, when you do move it to the cloud, don't continue doing an incremental backup on that workload. Do a full, right, initially, so you get a new baseline, and then do incrementals from there. So those are just some of the areas that we've seen that can be gotchas where it just gets overlooked through the migration process. And so with that, I want to thank you for attending the session today, and I believe that we have time for some question and answer. So if you enter questions in the Q&A, we will get right to them. All right, thank you, and welcome. I wanted to, before we jump into the Q&A, and again, if you have a question, go ahead and enter it now, and then I'll answer those live. I wanted to share some information about an upcoming event as well. So this will be our V Forum online, and so that's on May 13th. We're going to have 38 technical breakouts. There'll be practical-based sessions around build, run, and manage. You have video Q&A as well as 10 hands-on labs. So the link below is a great place to go and register. And again, it is a half-day event on May 13th. So we look forward to seeing you there. So I'm going to stop sharing that and get back to Q&A. So a couple of the questions that we've had are really good questions. So one is which on-prem vSphere versions can be linked to VMware Cloud on AWS? So we support backward compatibility. It's very different than enhanced linked mode today, where we can go backward compatible to vSphere 6 Update 3 with hybrid linked mode. So that's as far back as we go. Anything beyond that would not be able to enter linked mode. And then the other was around, another good question was around the sizer. And again, I want to emphasize, you can go right to the website, bmcsizer.vmware.com, and experiment with the tool very easily. But why doesn't it just connect to vCenter and pull that data? And so there's more complexity there than just connecting to vCenter. Obviously, that would be fairly easy. So we're looking at options to make the data import easier here. And so, you know, if you have feedback on what you would like to see there, let your account team know so that we can feed that back and make sure we integrate that into the product. Let me see if there was anything else. I think one of the other questions that I frequently get is around latency and requirements for vMotion live migration of workloads. So there's a couple ways to do that, right? So the vast majority of customers take a large percentage of their workloads and they do what we call a bulk migration that Paul talked about. What that does is it pre-replicates that VM out to VMware Cloud on AWS, and then you schedule a time, and then it executes a reboot where it comes up. But for critical workloads that you just can't accept downtime on, we have another option, which is live vMotion. And so this can be done natively if you're in hybrid linked mode to do that, or you can do that with HCX as well. So, you know, to do it natively without HCX, we require a direct connect. But with HCX, you can do that across the internet as well, live vMotion. And so I recommend, and HCX is included with the product. It's not some extra charge. It's just an add-on service that is included as part of VMware Cloud on AWS. You can utilize that to migrate those workloads, and I highly recommend using HCX as much as possible. Just got another question. Can we use AWS Lambda with VMC on AWS? So the answer is yes. There's no reason you can't use any native AWS services. The unique thing about Lambda, though, to keep in mind is as Lambda is a regional-based service, not a VPC-based service. So it wouldn't necessarily use that elastic network interface, that ENI, but you can use your direct connect, right, and create a public VIF, and then communicate directly to that AWS Lambda. But everything we're doing, all of the integration with AWS is really just a network integration. So all those services that are accessible across the network, those will just work with VMs running in VMware Cloud on AWS. So with that, I think that's all the time we have for questions. I want to be very respectful of everyone's time. I do want to thank you for attending today's session and encourage you, if there is interest in VMware Cloud on AWS, there's very easy ways to trial it. We have a OneNode that you can do via self-service via credit card. We have pilots that you can do. So please just work with your account team, and I'm sure we have an option that'll work for you to try the service out and prove that it is the right place for your workloads. So with that, I really appreciate your time today, and have a great rest of your day.